Okay, good evening everyone. We might make a start. Everyone got the seats? Oh, I think just not here yet, but anyway. I'll make a start anyway. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent. Thanks very much. My name is Councillor Galt and I am Chair of this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to my left of the horseshoe table is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Mayor, and Councillor Di Gillies. On the opposite side of the horseshoe table is Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger, and a large box where Victor might join us shortly. He's going to be late, sorry. He'll join us shortly, he will. I acknowledge our Manager, Governance and Legal, Mr Brian Wee on my left, and Director of Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker on my right. There are other officers in attendance tonight and they will be introduced as they present. So let's start with some general information. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed to the Council YouTube to enable public viewing of the proceedings. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those presenting this evening, and we appear to have a few in the gallery, when it comes to the agenda item at which you're going to present, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you up one by one to come forward and address the committee. If you are making submission, please present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. We would ask you to please don't repeat what earlier speakers have to say and keep the submission focused on relevant issues and the points not previously raised. If you are opposed to the planning application, it would be great if you could tell the committee why you disagree and suggest an alternative approach that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or detail in the officer's report. There is a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, including councillors, and whilst, as chair, I can vary that time, given the number of speakers we have tonight, we probably won't. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will sound a ringing of a bell, which gives you an indication you have 30 seconds left to wrap up your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process. So, moving on with the business of the meeting. Apologies, Mr Wee, do we have any apologies for tonight?
Through you, Chair. Councillor Stavros an apology this evening, and Councillor Franco has indicated he's delayed but will attend.
All right. Moving to the first item on our agenda this evening, adoption of the minutes. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 13th of November. Councillor Sinfield.
So moved, Chair.
Could I have a seconder? Councillor Gillies.
Seconded, thank you, Chair.
I now put the motion. All in support? Unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Moving to item 2 on the agenda tonight, declaration of conflict of interest. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you wish to foreshadow for matters on the agenda tonight? Councillor Sinfield.
Apologies, it's a legacy light,
A
Chair.
legacy light, thank you. Okay, well, I think we can then move on to the body of the agenda. Item 3, and move to the first item, 3.1, 48 to 52 Riversdale Road, Hawthorn, a 4-storey apartment development. I understand that tonight Mr. Jock Farrow will be presenting for council. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I present application PP23/0152, which seeks planning permission for the development of the land at 48 to 52 Riversdale Road, Hawthorn. The development proposes multiple dwellings on a lot and access to a road and a transport zone 2, comprising 29 dwellings within a 4-storey apartment typology upon basement car parking. The land is zoned residential growth zone and sits within a strategic and policy context which seeks increased diversity and density in housing and categorises the land as a main road apartment precinct. The express purpose of the planning zone is to provide housing at increased densities in buildings up to and including 4 storeys. The proposal has received 13 objections, raising the following key concerns: scale and bulk, loss of privacy, shadows to private open space, tree removal, traffic congestion and vehicle conflicts, and the impact upon the drainage network, along with its potential for overflow and flooding. The scale and bulk of the proposal align with the strategic and policy directives of the land. The proposal is well conceived from an architectural and urban design perspective, incorporating quality materials and a highly articulated facade. The building presents a split-level arrangement which allows it to step down with the slope of the land toward the rear. Off-site amenity impacts are considered to be well managed and appropriate given the context of the land. The proposal provides for considerable landscaping opportunities and accommodates the retention of the mature brittle gum within the front setback. Traffic impacts have been considered by Council's traffic engineers along with the head Transport for Victoria, who found the proposal to be acceptable. Further, the vehicle and bicycle parking provisions exceed requirements. The impacts of drainage have been closely considered by Council's drainage engineer, who advised that any new development would be required to result in reduced discharge to the network as compared to the existing conditions. It is recommended that the committee resolve to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit, subject to the conditions detailed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Farrow. Tonight in our gallery we have 7 people who wish to make submissions to council, 6 against and 1 for. To those that have joined us tonight, I will announce your names one at a time, and when I do, it would be appreciated if you then come forward to the head of the horseshoe table and start with your name and the suburb in which you live. I would again remind submitters that there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes. Please commence with your name and suburb and then proceed from there. So looking at the list we have tonight, we'll be starting with Miss Deborah Salter. If you'd please come forward, and then followed by Miss Fedora Fomin. My apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly.
Okay. I can speak. Okay. Hello, my name is Deborah Salter. I live at Hawthorn. Okay, and I live at number 1A Fairview Street.
Thank you.
Which is zoned neighbourhood residential. My property sits at the lower side of the western boundary of the proposed apartment development. On viewing the plans submitted to Council, I note with deep concern that I'll be significantly and directly impacted and wish to object with the following points. 1, the overshadowing of this development on my property will diminish my access to reliable sunlight. My east-facing windows are my predominant light source, and the excessive bulk of the building on my boundary will severely impact the quality of my life. The green outlooks that I and my neighbours have been accustomed to are now known to be important for good health. In an era of environmental sensitivities, when we're all trying to save on energy costs and finite resources, I will be forced to use more power, for light and temperature insulation. Point 2, my privacy will be impacted from the apartment windows and balconies, overlooking my upstairs bedroom windows with inevitable noise generated from people on their balconies and air conditioning infrastructure. Point 3, the developer plans to remove an established line of trees nestled against my eastern fence, providing cool insulation in summer and, importantly, privacy. The destruction of this green screen will expose me significantly to the sides and rear of the apartment, allowing overlooking into my property. Removal of these established trees appears contradictory to Boroondara's Council's stated objectives of promoting climate action. The impact of covering 2 relatively well environmentally balanced blocks with a monolithic concrete structure will contribute significantly to an increase in heat in the locality, contributing to health issues in the local community. Point 4, the development is to be constructed on a sloping site, and I'm concerned about the inadequate stormwater engineering infrastructure as noted in the plans. And point 5, Fairview Street is a narrow street when cars are parked on both sides. It appears from the plans there is inadequate underground car parking relative to the potential occupancy. There will be an inevitable overflow of cars parked permanently in Fairview Street, and Fairview Street is a conduit to Scotch College, and the street is also used to avoid the intersection of Riversdale and Glenferrie Road. Residents already struggle to have safe access in and out of their driveways. Importantly, protection of amenity in this sensitive Fairview Park area is crucial. Thank you.
Spot on in time, thank you. Would you mind just stay in your seat for a moment?
Yep.
Councillors, have you got any questions of this submitter? Councillor Bigger.
Hi,
Hello.
Ms. Salter. Thank you for your presentation. So I think, if I numbered them correctly, point 3 was about the established trees. That's the pear trees? Is that
Yes.
That are on both sides of that fence?
No. They're actually on the other, they're not on my side. They're right up nestled on the fence, but it's on their side.
They all are on the other side?
Yeah.
And would the retention of those trees make a difference for you, make a significant difference for you?
Absolutely, huge. I mean, although they're deciduous, there's a structure there during winter which, gives me some protection, but summer it's so important for the cooling, for the screening, and they must be, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years old. Hard to imagine the developer will be able to put something up unless he's got something magic happening that will instantly give me that privacy. And the other thing I don't quite understand is, I understand the excavating to do the underground car park, but I have seen other developments where they have managed to leave a set of trees that are tightly against a fence. So I'm hoping, with my fingers crossed, that they will revisit that and think that maybe they can be saved.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions? Thank you, Ms. Salter. You can return to the gallery.
Thank you.
I could then call on Ms. Fedora Fomin, and she will be followed by Rhonda Hoylter.
Thank you. Fedora Fomin. I live in Hawthorn. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My actual address is 40 Riversdale Road, so I'm a couple of doors away from the proposed development. Just to give you all the context, I'm not butting against the proposed site, unlike some of the other people who are here to speak today. I just thought I should outline this to you. And my concern is really because I live in Riversdale Road. We've had a lot of development over the last, the 30 or so years that I've lived there. Now, I understand what it is like to live on a main road, and we accept the noise, the traffic, and the rest of it. But at the same time, it just seems to me, and this is another example of some incredibly inappropriate development that's being proposed, and it almost appears to be a free-for-all that people can then just do what they like. Okay, look, I'll just give you a bit of context. when I read the initial proposal, I was initially thinking, oh, this was put together in a hurry. It just seemed to be so contradictory. Was it 29 units? Was it 30? Was it 31? And just a whole lot of information every which way. So, and there were a whole lot of issues that we've raised. And the report that Mr. Farrow has put together with all its recommendation is actually fantastic, because they've addressed a whole lot of the issues that were raised, as well as others that perhaps were not raised initially. So in a sense, it's a bit of a remediation plan. But in reading that this afternoon, I thought, well, to me, that just highlighted what an inadequate, hasty proposal was being put forward to the council. And just to pick up on that issue around the vegetation, I think Mr. Farrow's report makes it very clear that the majority of the trees are being removed. And I think in light of the council's policy around canopy cover and so on, it just seems to be very contrary to that sort of policy, and the one that I thought council was trying to encourage. And really, that's about it. As I said, I think I'll leave time for the other people, because they're more directly affected by the proposal.
Thank you, Ms Foman. Are there any questions from the floor tonight? None? No. Oh, sorry. Councillor Watson, sorry, I nearly missed you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms Voten. Sorry if I mispronounced your name there. Thank you for coming in and your presentation. Just a question. You mentioned that you believe it's an inappropriate development. Could you tell me why and what you think would be an appropriate development?
Because if you look at that streetscape, that part of Riversdale Road between Fairview and Fordham Road, it's all very much single story, except to the very end when you get to 46 Riversdale Road, which is 2 stories, and they're all very much contained within those blocks. So now you're going to have the joining of 2 blocks and this massive 4-storey development right in your face. All the other properties have a lot of vegetation. There'll be very little vegetation left here at all. It would just stand out. It would be just, as I said, that was my initial impression, as well as I said, just the bulk of that building.
Yeah. Could I just summarise what I think you said? So your concerns are the height and the loss of vegetation, and that's what makes it inappropriate in your view, is that correct?
It's the height and the bulk and how much room it actually takes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There don't appear to be any further questions from the table. Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Franco, please.
Thank you. Are there any changes? I mean, noting that your preference is that we refuse the application, but were we to approve the application, are there any specific changes or amendments that you would like?
I'm not in a position to make those sorts of recommendations, but I am. If I could just mention something that's happening across the road, you may be familiar with what we call the Erasmus tennis courts. I think the number is 51 or 53 Riversdale Road. Is that right, Mr. Farrow?
Can I just check? This is the Erasmus Primary School, or
yes,
across the road.
That site had a permit for 31 units. It's now been sold to someone else who's now reduced the number of units from 31 to 19. And I was certainly heartened by that, and I would like to see consideration of that sort of proposal.
Thank you. Happy with that? There doesn't appear to be any further questions, so thank you, Ms Foman. You can now return to the gallery. I will now call upon Rhonda Holter to come to the horseshoe table, and she'll be followed by Anna Levy. If you could just start with your name and suburb, that'd be great.
Yes,
Thank
certainly.
you.
My name is Rhonda Holter. I live on the corner of Riversdale Road and Fordholm Road. I've been a resident there for 40 plus years, and it's so sad to see the the landscape of the area deteriorate with all these massive buildings. The one that we're discussing tonight, I just think is a massive piece of work on a piece of land. And if we could have it reduced in size, that would be a huge help. I think a 3-storey, because of I'm impacted by privacy, it would look straight into my back garden and swimming pool and into my big picture window that is my bedroom. I have spoken to Jock, I think it was, about how the balconies would be and how the glass would be for the windows, but I'm afraid I don't really understand. I still think I would be quite impacted. Traffic is another huge problem. Trying to get out of Fordholm Road into Riversdale Road, I have been known to ask someone to go and press the pedestrian button so that I can get out. And I think that's most unsatisfactory, especially as there's another build going right at the end of Fordholm Road with more units in that. The other points I've made have been covered by Deb and Theodora, so I won't go repeating all of that.
Thank you very much, Ms Holter. If you could just remain in your seat for a moment. Councillors, are there any questions? None? Thank you very much. You could return to the gallery. I'll now call upon Anna Levy, and Anna will be followed by Patrick Levy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Levy, and I live at 1 Fairview Street. So our entire boundary, southern boundary, is the 2 properties on Riversdale Road. So we are greatly impacted. I'm actually reading a statement from Jan Guthrie, Jan and Bruce, who are number 3. Riversdale, and she can't be here, which is very disappointed. So if that's okay, if I could just read her statement.
Thank you.
Yep. We wish to object to the granting of this permit on the grounds that the proposed building is not compliant with the requirements of the Burundara planning scheme, specifically clause 55 and its sub-clauses. She believes that it will result in negative changes to the amenity of the surrounding and adjacent differently zoned areas. So she's talking about overshadowing of the neighbours and reducing morning sun, which we've talked about, overlooking and loss of privacy, also the present excessive visual bulk, which is more than 20 metres of unbroken concrete. That's quite a concern. Also, a big concern to us is the interface of the 2 zones, the growth zone and the residential zone. So we are here and we've got this next to us. She also believes that it would set a negative precedent on that part of Riversdale Road, whereas from Fairview down to Power was not the growth zone. She talks about stormwater damage because our 2 properties have been greatly impacted by stormwater in the last few years, which council know about, and that the pits and drains aren't in the right maps. No one exactly knows where they are. She's also concerned about the proposal which exceeds the standard site coverage of 67%, and that she finds that unacceptable. Also, she is talking about, I'm just trying to make it quick here, the intent of the character of the neighbourhood and the visual impact of the new development. She talks about the loss of sunlight, and clearly the height and the setback is a big concern, as it is to us, that there is not enough setback. There's 1 metre at our back fence, which is enough for a hedge. That's all, and then there's 2 metres of deck. So we have a lot of trees. We have very old trees, Pittosporum, ash, golden ash. They mightn't be the best trees, but they're very old and they're very beautiful, and they're at great risk when we have 1 metre left. Anyway, what else? So, so she's just saying, can council assure downhill residents that there'll be no adverse effects of their properties from flooding, and just to protect our general amenity and privacy.
Thank you. Spot on time-wise. There are some questions, so if you could just remain in your seat for a moment, that'd be appreciated. Councillor Bigger.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I realize that you're writing this, or that you're reading this on behalf of Jan, but I also appreciate that you are going to be impacted by the development yourself. And I just wonder whether you can answer on her behalf or yours, if there's a sense that there's anything that could be addressed that would make you feel.
I think all of us are not. We're not anti the development. We're just anti the type, and that we feel that the development needs to be take away the visual map, cut it up, put green in, bring the setback forward. Setback is important from the front, so it looks nice on Riversdale Road, but also it's very important from the south and the west for Deb, for us, because 1 metre is not enough. It's 3 metres, but it's 1 metre of earth, 2 metres of decking, and then there's a fence. And as my husband will talk about, we are almost 2.5 metres south of their ground level, which you can't even see from Google Earth. You have to see it to believe it.
So it sounds like there's not one thing. It's a few things, but
it's
bulk
one
is one of the biggest
it's
issues.
Bulk, it's setback, it's loss of space and privacy, and the greenery. I think everyone just loves Fairview. We love the area, we love it, and we just want to share. Of course, it's for everyone, but too many small apartments, maybe bigger family apartments. For families, a lot of schools, so many schools, parks. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a second question from Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to come and present to us. You've addressed the question about bulk, but just with the comments about the trees, can you just help me be clear, please? Are the trees that you were concerned about on Jan Guthrie's side, on your side?
On my land.
You're actually on your land,
Yeah.
but you feel they're going to be at risk because of the development?
Well, they're right on the fence line. Right. They're on the fence, the southern boundary. So they run. We have a pool area that has pittosporum trees, and we have a golden ash up there, and then we have trees and a big old pittosporum in the middle. So we have 2 houses, 2 back gardens looking at us, and those trees are on the boundary, and they will not survive this development. And even though Pitar did mention somewhere that, the pittosporum will be better off because there's a pool net there now that they're taking up, well, it's an above ground pool. So, all the lawn that is there obviously feeds us and goes down. It's upsetting to know that being so low down, our trees will go, and they will go.
Yeah, understandably. Thank you for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm not sure if you're going to be in a position to answer this. You raised concerns about stormwater and the impact that it was having. I thought, could you explain the impact that you or your neighbours receiving? And then separately, there is a condition. It's a 2-part question. So maybe if you could explain
well, we've had over the few years, sort of the last 2019, 21 and 22, big rain events in Melbourne, and every time we've had a big rain event, the pits have flooded. So it's actually come into our house, into the kitchen living, into the laundry, everywhere. It's flooded down into Jan because it's a very steep street. So we're here, and then Jan is another 2 metres down. It's, terraced. And all our garden earth from the water went through the fence down and took her earth into her pool, and then flooded all her pool equipment and flooded the cellar. And this happened 3 times until council came out and had a big investigation didn't even know the pits were there. She's got 3. One was completely blocked. There are pits on the Fordham Road tennis court that aren't even on the map, and they go all the way down to the little lane at the bottom of Fairview Street that runs to Fairview Park. It's a mess, and we haven't had any, because they've cleared the drains. They sent the big guys in with the big drills, and they have cleared those drains, but they're old, and we get water from Fordham through our house as well. So the water comes from everywhere. This development, while it says it has put things in place, still has, we've read, a lot of synthetic turf. I mean, that's not going to help the situation.
Thank you. The report does reference an on-site detention mechanism.
Which says somewhere may fail.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Do you want to comment on that at all, or that recommendation? You're concerned that it'll fail, or
Well,
not be
I think it's great if there's things in place, but not if they may fail, you know. And I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. I think that exhausts questions. Thank you very much. You may return to the
Thank you
gallery.
very much.
I next call upon Mr. Patrick Levy, and Mr. Levy will be followed by Joanna Dodds.
Hello, I'm Pat Levy and I live in 1 Fairview Street, Hawthorn.
Thank you.
My wife and I are the owners and residents of 1 Fairview Street, Hawthorn, being the property immediately to the south of the entire boundary of this application site. We've lived there for 27 years. I've emailed all the councillors about our issues and the issues we have and our neighbours about this development. We're not against the development. We just ask for some compromise and for it to be done in a practical and sustainable way. I would like to remind Council that it is their responsibility to adhere to the transition between the residential growth zone and the neighbourhood residential zone, and to quote from your bylaws, to provide a transition in building scale and setbacks to residential properties located within the neighbourhood residential zone, Schedule 3, or public open spaces. The current population on these 2 blocks house 4 adults and 5 children. This application is 4 stories high with 29 apartments, which could house a maximum of 169 people with 36 car parks. I'd also like to mention to Council that on the south side of Riversdale Road, there is only 1 3-storey building between the Tram Museum and Glenferrie Road, that one being closer to Glenferrie Road. All the 3- and 4-storey buildings are on the north side of Riversdale Road, as there is no issue with shadowing, slope or privacy issues. Due to the hill we live on, we are already 1.5 metres below the application site. They are starting their first floor 1 metre above the present soil line. So we are now 2.5 metres below the start of the build. Then we need to add 14.1 metres for a total of 16.6 metres from our boundary fence. We'll obviously have shadowing and privacy issues. We have significant flooding problems due to the slope, which Council are aware of. These flooding issues continue down to our neighbours, as my wife just mentioned, number 3 and number 5 Fairview Street. With the suggestion of removing all vegetation, as they are weeds, will obviously cause greater runoff for all the properties north of us. There's been absolutely no consideration to the trees on our property, which, again, as my wife said, would all die with a development of this magnitude. While development in the residential growth zone is expected, it must be sensitive to its context, and particularly neighbouring properties that are within the neighbourhood residential zone. The 14 objections that you have received is a clear message that this application fails in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. If you could remain in your seat for a moment to see if there's any questions from the table. There are none, so you may return to the gallery. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next, if I can call upon Joanna Dodds, and Joanna will be followed by Andrew Bromley. Oh,
Okay.
this is a change of order, isn't it? Is this correct?
That's positive. That's
Just stand next to me, okay?
So
Hello.
this one here.
Am I okay to go?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Team Dodds, okay.
Yeah, Team Dodds, that's it. My name's Johanna Dodds and I live in Hawthorn. We just moved from Richmond in the City of Yarra just 6 months ago at 60 Riversdale Road. We moved because of overdevelopment and we're now very concerned that Riversdale Road is heading this way as well. When I say we, sorry, my husband and I, but my husband is away at the moment. We want this development reduced in size to 2-storey because it will affect us in these ways. Number one is loss of privacy. Our side yard, which is one of our private open spaces on the west side of our house, right next to the new development. The developers keep referring to this private open space as an unused area in their reports, which is not correct. We will be greatly affected in this area by loss of privacy and it will feel like Big Brother to us. We use this area a lot with the kids, pets, etc. Second point is overshadowing. We do have actually a solar power order booked in for January. There has been a bit of a complication with our electricity which has delayed this. We wanted to get it straight away when we moved in. The panels are actually going on the west side of the roof, so our solar production will be majorly affected due to the overshadowing of the building. And the third point that is very important to us is traffic and vehicle conflict. Will be really affected by the development's proposed driveway, which will run adjacent to our driveway. It's a major safety concern for us. The only way that we get out of our driveway is by reversing out onto Riversdale Road. It's quite dangerous even now, and like Rhonda, we look for a gap in the road and we back out onto the busy road. When we're reversing, we're looking back and then we pull forward to join the traffic and look forward at the last moment. So there will be vehicle conflict and possible collisions if there are cars driving out of the new driveway at the same time. The traffic report must state concerns about this particular situation as I find it a big safety concern. I think that's enough from me. I hope I got my points across, sorry.
Thank you. Can you bear with it for a moment to see if there's any questions?
As long as you can, yeah, I'm fine.
Thanks very much. Councillors, are there any questions? You've appeared. Councillor Sinfield. Oh, no, sorry. Councillor Bigger, my apologies.
Thank you. Sorry, my light was on, but it must have gone off somehow. I just wanted to say well done. Your multitasking is phenomenal, and it's hard to present at council at the best of times, alone with 2 little ones and a husband away. So thank you for your submission.
No worries, thank you. Oh, thanks for that. Oh, good. No more?
Councillor Bigger.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. Thank you. I just wanted to do a couple of things. One, you mentioned... Go ahead and stand up if you need to. Just walk around or whatever. That might help. So just in terms of, you mentioned your solar panels. So you've got solar panels booked in to be installed.
Yes,
and which will be, which I guess we haven't done an assessment of those because they're not there now, but they will be affected by the overshadowing of the building next to it is what you're concerned.
Yes, exactly right. We've I sent Jock some details about the reason why we were delayed to get our solar panels. We had to get a new power pit put in. There was something wrong with our electricity feed, so that's what has delayed us. But we have the whole layout. We actually had it booked. We just couldn't proceed. So we will be getting them in January.
Okay, great, thanks. And just to clarify again, then about this loss, you mentioned the loss of privacy. Now, I believe that's the space behind your, if I remember, but sort of behind your garage. Is that right?
Yes, it snakes around along the side and then down along the back of our property. That's our side yard and our little backyard.
And it's on the boundary. That's all right. It's on the boundary.
Yes.
So it's on the western boundary with this building. Okay.
Yeah. It's right on the fence line, and then our side yard, and then our house.
Yeah.
It is a private open space area, and I just need that to be clarified because it keeps getting called an unused area, but it's not. It's definitely being used.
Great. Thank you so much, and well done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I now call upon Mr. Andrew Bromley, who is in support of the proposal tonight? Thank you. If we just start with your name and suburb, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Andrew Bromley. I represent the Pittard Group, which is the permit applicant in this case. We operate from Cheltenham. Firstly, thank you all for the opportunity to present to you tonight. We're in agreement with the council officer's position in this application in recommending support of the proposal. The officer, as you heard at the commencement of this proceeding, concluded that the proposal has strategic support, achieves the express purpose of the residential growth zone, which allows for density up to and including 4 stories. We also accept all of the conditions in the officer recommendation. We also say that it's noteworthy in this case that the Condition 2 requirements for amended plans can generally be described as matters of detail and not conditions that require substantial changes to the proposed built form. In our submission, this reflects the quality of the proposal and the high degree of compliance that we say it has with the Burundara planning scheme, including Clause 55. As councillors will obviously be aware, Riversdale Road is one of the few locations in this municipality where the residential growth zone has been applied and where 4-storey buildings are supported by policy in a residential zone. Whilst there has been criticisms of the height in this case, it does comply with the height restrictions in the schedule to the residential growth zone. The change in character, which is supported by the policy, we say is something that is evolving in Riversdale Road. It's evidenced by a number of 4-storey buildings, 3-storey buildings that are emerging in the area. The Erasmus Tennis Courts proposal is one such example, which is directly opposite this site. We say the proposal has been designed to accommodate or respond to the change in zone and the sensitive interfaces to the west and to the south. It's a split-level building that steps down with the fall of the land and is comfortably compliant with the Res Code side and rear setbacks. The development will not overshadow the property to the south. The shadows fall within the existing fence line. And whilst there is some shadow that falls at 9 a.m. to the properties to the west at 1A and 1B Fairview Street, those shadows are gone by 10 a.m. And again, we refer to the council officers' findings on that in that they found it appropriately minimised shadows and was a reasonable outcome that complied with the Res Code objective. In relation to the retention of trees, we've obviously retained the very large gum tree in the front setback, and we acknowledge that that's important for the neighbourhood character and is certainly a positive aspect that will certainly contribute to the streetscape and also contribute to the amenity of the future residents of this building. There was a question raised in respect to the retention of the row of pear trees at the rear, on our property at the rear of 1A Fairview Street.
Mr. Bromley, can you wrap up your presentation now? Thanks very much.
I was just going to say those trees can be retained. We're comfortable with the condition that that requires that to occur. So yes, unless there's any questions of me, that's my submissions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We do have some questions. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Romilly. I understand that the site coverage is a little greater than standard. And I'm obviously asking because I feel slightly uncomfortable with that. How do you respond to that?
Yes, so the site coverage is 65%, whereas a standard obviously requires 60% site coverage. It's our view essentially that the building is well set back from all its boundaries. There's no walls on boundaries, whilst there is a marginal exceedance of that site coverage standard. It's not something that we say impacts adjoining properties, and it's consistent with the emerging character of the area where larger footprint apartment buildings are encouraged.
Just a follow-up, if I may. So how does that respond to the transitional nature of the zone changing? It just seems a bit at odds to me to be saying that it responds to
a need to transition to a less dense zone, and yet you're already over the recommended?
Well, I think the transition in this case is more about setbacks than it is about site coverage. And the transition to the south and to the west, we have building setbacks. The building is set back a minimum of 3 metres. The basement's also set back a minimum of 3 metres. There was a submission put to you earlier that the decks are set back 1 metre from the boundary. That's not the case. The minimum setback of the decks is 1.5 metres, and it's predominantly 2 metres. And then the setbacks above the ground level are all in excess of the Res Code standard B17 requirements. So I think in terms of talking about transition and transitioning to the zones, whereas Res Code would allow, say, for example, a 1 metre rear setback, we've got a 3 metre rear setback, and the building is progressively stepped beyond that, such as as I said, there's no overshadowing impact to the south. The shadows all fall within the existing fence line. So yes, I think those factors are more indicative of a transition.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the ornamental pear trees along the boundary. Did you say that it's the intention to retain all of those?
We can, yes. Right. Yes, as I said, I'm happy for there to be a condition drafted that requires that, yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
There are no more questions tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Bromley. You can return to the balcony.
Thank you, Councillor.
That seems to finish the questions on this topic for tonight. Thank you all for coming and for sticking within the time limits. It was excellent. We will now return to the officers for matters arising.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. In no particular order, I've tried to order these to make sense so that they flow and they're grouped in themes. So in terms of building height and density, the proposal has a maximum height of 4 stories and 4.1 metres, which is below the preferred height under the zone of 14.5 metres. The strategic directives of the land are to increase density in apartment typologies, and the express purpose of the zone is to provide housing at increased densities, including in 4-storey buildings. In terms of the transition to the NRZ land and side and rear setbacks, massing would be focused towards the front of the site where adjacent properties are also zoned residential growth zone. The bulk would reduce toward the rear. The development has been designed as a split level to step down with the slope of the land toward the rear. The development exceeds the B17 side and rear setback requirements to all NRZ land. A condition of permit is also recommended to require compliance with the north-facing window standards, resulting in an increased setback from the southern boundary. How slope is to be taken into account? Slope is addressed in a number of ways. The development has been designed with a split-level arrangement, stepping down toward the rear of the site. The upper levels of the development are progressively recessed from the rear boundary as height increases, fitting comfortably within the side and rear setback requirements and resulting in a 10.6 metre setback at 3rd floor level. That's from the rear boundary. Recommended conditions would, as I've mentioned, require an increased setback from the rear boundary opposite the north-facing window. And in terms of the Res Code standards that specifically take into account slope, this is the shadowing of secluded private open space standard. Due to the setbacks and increased recesses at the upper levels, shadows are considered to be well managed, and in terms of number 1 Fairview Street, proposed shadows would fall within the shadows already cast by the existing fence. In terms of the shadow impacts more broadly, the development complies with the shadowing standards to all properties except for 1A and 1B Fairview Street. To these properties, the development would not result in additional shadow from 10 a.m. onwards, meaning the secluded private open space areas would be unaffected for a period of 5 hours between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. This is generally in line with the standard. The non-compliance comes about due to the existing shadows to these spaces already being below the standard. The reasons for the variation being supported by officers are articulated in the report, but in brief, ResCode must be viewed through a lens of the strategic directives for the site, which is to increase density, including in 4-storey buildings. Both properties would continue to receive reasonable levels of sunlight for a period of 5 hours, with the minimum levels within a 5-hour period occurring at 3 p.m, where a minimum of 17 square metres would still be retained, and this is unchanged from the existing conditions. The level of proposed shadow is not considered to be significant, which meets the test of the objective and the standard. For site coverage, ResCode does not take into account the strategic context of the land. For example, the standard suggests 60% should be achieved for the neighbourhood residential zone, general residential zone, and residential growth zone. Given the residential growth zone seeks increased built form and density, it is typically necessary to increase site coverage to achieve the strategic aspirations for the land. In such situations, a better measure is the actual off-site amenity impacts, which are considered to be well managed. It's further noted that the development achieves the permeability standards exceeding 20%. In terms of light to neighbouring windows, it exceeds all setback requirements. In terms of privacy, the development either complies with the overlooking requirements or recommended conditions would ensure compliance. Officers agree that privacy should be afforded to the side setback of number 60 Riversdale Road, and conditions would require privacy to protect this space. In terms of parking requirements, the development exceeds the requirements of the planning scheme. It also exceeds the requirements of the bicycle parking. In terms of environmental sustainability, the development would achieve best practice with a range of initiatives, including solar panels, EV charging, an oversupply of bike parking, water and energy efficiency, and a range of other initiatives. Concerns were raised around vehicle conflicts and the location of the vehicle crossover. The location of the crossover, along with the likely vehicle movements and conflicts, have been reviewed by Council's traffic engineers, along with the head Transport for Victoria. Neither experts have raised any concerns in this regard. A double-width crossover is required to allow for vehicles to enter the site, even while a vehicle is waiting to leave, avoiding queuing on Riversdale Road. A sensor and stoplight system is also proposed, which prioritises cars entering the site and makes vehicles wait at the bottom of the ramp until the incoming vehicle has passed. A recommended permit condition would also require waste collection to occur outside of peak times. Concerns were raised regarding drainage and flooding to surrounding properties. Officers are aware of the reported overflows of the stormwater system around the end of 2021 and early 2022. This point was discussed in detail with Council's drainage engineer, and further inquiries were made to Council's drainage maintenance team. Recommended permit conditions would require the approval of a drainage detention system by Council's drainage engineers prior to the development commencing. The drainage engineer advised that any discharge to the stormwater system, and this is through the detention system, would be required to be at a lower rate than as existing, ultimately resulting in an improvement for the land. The maintenance team advised that they undertook investigations following the reported overflows and cleared tree roots from the system. They are not aware of any further issues being reported. In addition to the required detention systems, the development would have a rainwater harvesting tank, which would further reduce flows into the stormwater system. Concerns were raised around the level of tree removal on site. All neighbouring trees and street trees would be protected and retained. Tree 24, which is on the subject site and is a 15-metre high brittle gum to the front setback, would be retained. The remaining trees on site have been assessed as having low arboricultural value and would be removed. And as you've heard from the applicant, they're happy to retain the pear trees. Substantial replanting is proposed, which far exceeds the requirements of the planning scheme. Concerns were raised around the protection of trees along the southern boundary. Council's arborists have reviewed the application in detail and they are satisfied that all neighbouring trees can be protected. All neighbouring trees would be required to be protected by conditions, and a tree protection management plan would be required to be approved by Council's arborists, and arboricultural supervision would also be required during the works. It is noted that to the rear boundary, the greatest level of encroachment to the tree protection zones is 9%, which is a minor encroachment. And lastly, concerns were raised about the impact of solar panels to number 60 Riversdale Road. Now, while the impact upon neighbouring solar panels is a relevant consideration under the planning scheme, those impacts can only be considered if the solar panels are existing. Under the planning scheme, we can't have regard to proposed solar panels. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Farrow. Any further officer comments? That's it. Wonderful. I now turn to councillors. Are there any questions of the officers tonight? Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the officers. With regards to 60 Riversdale Road, our presenter had indicated that the side part of the property was part of their private open space. And having a look at the plans, I'd just like to get officers' interpretation whether the compliance with the standard A14 and the 40 square metres, does it include the front garden, and is that deemed a private open space in this instance? Or just trying to understand officer perspective on whether we're achieving the 5 hours of compliance.
Through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor. So they've got secluded private open space to the front setback, and also to the east there's a courtyard. So when you're looking at shadow impacts, it's based on effectively all areas of secluded private open space can be considered in the compliance, and they're well and truly within compliance of the overshadowing standards.
And is it a collective area of 40 square metres, or can it be made up of individual portions of sunlight?
Through you, Chair. Ideally, it should be a single area that receives a usable amount. You can look at different areas throughout the day. It might be 40 square metres in one area at a certain time of the day and achieve a full 40 square metres at a different time.
And one further question, sorry to labour on this one, is do we achieve compliance for these residents, with a young family obviously, simply on the use of their front garden?
Through you, Chair. 1 second, Councillor.
Can you sort of pretend that's all they've got?
Through you, Chair, it does comply to the front garden, and then they've got the supplementary spaces as well that receives further sunlight.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Look, my question has some relevance, but it's not specifically to the design. It's with regard to the power lines, high voltage along the Riversdale frontage. Would it be feasible to assume that the applicant contractor would have to have bundle cabling done or some sort of power line clearance prior to proceeding with this?
Through you, Chair. So it's not a consideration under the planning process, but it would be a matter between the applicant, the developer and the power authority.
Right. And look, I don't know if this could be conditioned. I understand you've just said it's not a matter for council, but whether or not the applicant would consider a condition if they had to go to the expense to undergo significant power line protection, whether or not there'd be a willingness to undergo cable aerial bundling between the two streets, which would be Fordham and Fairview, to ensure then that the nature strip trees along the frontage there would always be protected. It would give additional green space.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe if I just address that, wouldn't be a condition that would be appropriate to put place on the planning permit. It would put the applicant in a position where they may not be able to comply with that condition. It wouldn't be an appropriate requirement in regard to the authority that has responsibility and obligations over those power lines. And even if it was to be put in place, it would have very little effect given it's such a small and short length of power line. It's a condition that we would indicate wouldn't be appropriate for this type of permit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. My question relates to what we heard was that number 1 Fairview seems to be significantly set down lower than the site 48 and 52. Do we have any ability to take that into account when we're considering applications like this? Because it does sound like it's quite a significant drop down, which would make the proposed development feel more dominant.
Through you, Chair. So the slope is addressed and taken into account in a number of ways. The architects and the applicant have specifically designed the application to step down with the slope. So the fourth floor towards the front of the site sits significantly higher internally. There'd be stairs to step down to the fourth floor towards the rear. Now, another design feature, I guess, that they've included to address the slope and to reduce that off-site amenity impact to the rear is that they've actually designed the building envelope to sit well and truly within the side and rear setback requirements. So under the planning scheme, theoretically, they could have built that out to the maximum envelopes. Now, as I touched on in the arising matters, the Res Code standard that really takes into account the slope of the land is the shadow impacts. So where you have shadows falling on a piece of land that sits at a lower elevation, those shadows are naturally longer. So that's factored into the shadow diagrams, and they've designed, almost worked backwards with their setbacks to ensure that any shadows to that property to the south fall within the existing shadow cast by the fence line. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Bigger.
You happy? Thank you. I have a few questions. So I think that the resident, one of the residents of 1A or 1B Fairview said that their property was in the neighbourhood residential zone, and I just wanted to check. I thought that you had referred to it as being in the growth zone. Can I just clarify that on 1A and 1B?
Through you, Chair, 1A and 1B Fairview are both neighbourhood residential zone.
They are neighbourhood residential zone. So it's only, the residential zone doesn't go down, the growth zone doesn't go off of Riversdale Road. I was under.
No, so the only property that doesn't have direct interface with Riversdale Road that's in the residential growth zone is 2/60 Riversdale Road. So it sits behind number 60 Riversdale Road. To the rear and to the southwest is neighbourhood residential zone.
Okay, thank you. Going to the non-compliance on the shadow of 1A and 1B, I just wanted to clarify. I think Mr. Bromley suggested that there would be some shadow at 9 a.m. I thought it would be fully in shadow at 9 a.m. Is that correct? And is that a change? Because I thought that you suggested that was not a change. There was no change to the shadowing over those properties.
Through you, Chair. So at 9 a.m, they would be in full shadow, and that is new shadow that would be cast by the development. Where I was mentioning that there would be no change, that's from 10 a.m. onwards. So, yeah, new shadow from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and no further shadow from 10 a.m. onwards.
So fully shadow from 9. Okay. Thank you. To go to 60 Riversdale Road. Now, you said that the conditions that we've been placed on it would protect that, and I appreciate that Councillor Thompson has asked a question about this, but just to clarify again, would protect the private, secluded private open space. So you're not talking, when you said that, about the line of garden, effectively, that runs right on the boundary. That the resident referred to as being space that they use with their kids. You're not describing that as so their secluded private open space when you're talking about it. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. So there's two different considerations here. I guess what we were talking about before was around compliance with the shadow impacts. So they've got multiple areas of secluded private open space, which any one of them can be compliant with the shadow standards. Now, in terms of overlooking, we would consider that to be secluded private open space, and the conditions would protect that side setback from any overlooking.
I see. So yeah, you're protecting on overlooking, but not on overshadowing.
Correct. The property would comply with the shadow standards.
Okay, thank you. Residents have also raised concerns about safety at the vehicle exit. I know that and the difficulty of seeing clearly, I know that, we've made some adjustments, particularly about, to the proposal about the cars coming in and out of the delay and some of that in terms of traffic. Is there anything that we have, that we could do that would improve the safety, I suppose, for 60 Riversdale Road? They continue to raise that as a concern about the exit out of their property. Is that something we have considered? Or is there going to be any concerns raised about the safety at that exit?
Through you, Chair. So from the officer's position is that no changes would be necessary. It's been reviewed by our traffic engineers. It's been reviewed by the road authority, which is the head transport for Victoria. And both sets of experts are satisfied that the vehicle access arrangements and any potential vehicle conflicts are suitable as they are and safe.
Thank you. I just want to ask about, just to clarify this question about solar panels, and I suppose it's one that I don't know that we've specifically addressed the question here yet that I can recall of when planned solar panels, how we balance that with arrived solar panels, understanding that, people might make plans before in advance, and obviously we don't want to sort of encourage maybe we do want to encourage a huge rush of solar panels, but maybe not for this reason. But I would like to just ask a question about that, whether or not we think that, we've thought through that policy enough in a circumstance like this.
I might answer that through yourself, Chair. I think this is an example of where planning needs to consider the context as it stands when the planning decisions are made. So as indicated by Mr Farrow, the test here is, are the solar panels existing? That needs to be the relevant and only consideration in terms of those solar panels. It's not within the planning objectives and considerations to consider potential future solar panels.
Thank you. Just have a couple of more clarifications. So residents have also expressed concerns, and in fact, I was involved in dealing with the flooding that happened within the last few years, and it was significant. And I just want to, press on that question again about what confidence we have. I realize that we're conditioning it, and maybe we're saying, well, if we condition it, therefore it could get, if that confidence is not there at that point, that could be dealt with it then. But it just does concern me. I wonder if officers could speak to that. Obviously, I think we as councillors need to feel confident that we're not adding to the problems that have existed in the past. And maybe it would be helpful also if you could speak to the potential improvement in that is suggested through this condition.
I might just touch on that first, Chair, and then I might ask Mr Farrow to add anything further. But I think it's important to understand the principle that is applied by the planning department and drainage engineers when it comes to new development on residential sites. And that principle is that new development and greater intensity development should not place a greater burden on the drainage infrastructure that exists in the local area. And that's where these conditions around an on-site detention system are put in place. And they are there to retain and restrict the flow of water so that it's no greater than effectively an existing standard dwelling that often always occupies already a block of land. So that's the principle that's applied. Then those conditions put those requirements in place to the expectations of the drainage engineer team, and those ultimate plans are approved and inspected and ensured that are set up properly on the block. Now, when they're set up properly, they are quite effective and operate quite well, and they do restrict the flow of water to minimise the impact of new development that's put in place. I don't know whether Mr Farrow wants to add anything further to that.
Thank you. Apologies, I just have, I think, one more question if I could find it. I had some concerns about that this wasn't raised in this circumstance, but I believe it's on. While I try to find the page, I'll speak to it. It's there a non-compliance that feels somewhat more significant at 2.35 meters. I think it's on page. Maybe you can help me.
Through you, Chair, for the councillor. I think it's page 45.
Thank you. It is 45.
Of the amalgamated document.
Yes, thank you. Is that something that could be, potentially there's a fix for that? I do feel like on this we're pushing the boundaries a bit, but 2.3 meters makes me feel more uncomfortable.
Through you, Chair. So this is an area that we've looked at quite closely. Now, we do have to have regard to the strategic context of the zone, the uplift, the density that is, sought under the residential growth zone and the strategic policy. So in a situation like this, it's not uncommon to have variations to the res code standards. They're sometimes required to meet the strategic aspirations for the site. In that kind of situation, we'd be looking at what the adjacent land is to that area of encroachment. So in this case, the dwelling in question is adjacent to the secluded private open space. Sorry, it's not adjacent to the secluded private open space of the neighbouring dwelling. It's next to a side setback. There's 6.5 to 7 metre setbacks from their windows, which complies with the setback to window standards. It doesn't result in any additional overshadowing to the property that is adjacent or to their area of secluded private open space. And the adjacent property is also zoned residential growth zone, and in such instances, there's a greater weight afforded to the housing growth objectives over the amenity. But that said, it's not considered the development would result in any unreasonable amenity impacts to that property anyway.
Councillor Bigger, does that satisfy your question?
Yes, for now, thank you.
Does that complete your questions? Thank you. Councillor Franco.
Thank you, Chair. One of the residents, I think it was Fedora, contrasted in her presentation the site across the road, the tennis courts, and I'd just like to understand, if you're in a position to explain, A, I presume it's in the same growth zone on the opposite side, and B, was there a reduction in a proposed development, and why was that achieved there, or what's proposed there, and how does that contrast and compare with the site that we're dealing with now?
Chair, through yourself, look, we don't have detailed information at hand in regard to the site opposite, so it's very difficult for us to discuss that in any level of detail. There might have been some commercial impacts for that particular developer in terms of the market style type of development that they're proposing, but certainly we aren't able to comment in any detail on what decisions have been made there.
I appreciate that. But the planning controls are the same on that side of the street, and presumably the maximum achievable across the road is the same as this side, theoretically.
Again, Chair, yes, that's correct. It is the same zone on that side of the street, but there might be other factors impacting the landowners or developers' decisions that change the outcome that they're seeking on that site.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Addis.
Sorry, I know I've had a go. There seems to be some sort of emphasis about we should allow the standards not to be met because of strategic aspirations of this site, and yet I'm struggling with that. It seems to me the standards are there for a reason, and how do we balance those competing requirements, desires?
Thanks. I might just touch on that first for yourself, Chair, and again ask Mr Farrow if he wishes to add to it. And I think it's important to go to the strategic level first, and what are the expectations for a site like this in terms of development outcome. And that strategic position is established by the planning scheme and the policy drivers and housing expectations identified in the policy levels of the planning scheme and then the zone of the land. And that certainly sets a context then for considering the objectives of the planning scheme around residential development specifically. Many of the standards within those residential guidelines are standard for all zones, whether it's a low residential development outcome or a higher order, more intense residential development outcome. Often those standards are exactly the same. However, the way that the objectives are applied will vary based on the development framework and expectations in terms of intensity development on the site. So yes, the standards are there for a reason, but the standards aren't there to be applied equally and exactly the same for all sites. It's the objectives that are trying to be achieved that need to be considered variably and slightly differently depending on the broader context of the site and expectations for development outcomes.
So what would you say to the suggestion that potentially it might only require a reduction of one dwelling to make it compliant, and yet, Maybe I'll leave it at that. Yeah, you understand the point I'm making. Is there a way we can understand that?
Perhaps just to touch on that as well, through yourself, Chair. It sounds attractive to say, let's just remove one dwelling and it'll all come down and comply. It's not quite so straightforward and simple. One dwelling can't be reduced to then apply exponentially across the whole site.
I think I was making the point that the applicant could have designed it and presented it to us in a way that...
It could have. The expectation and responsibility that the planning staff need to have is this an appropriate and acceptable outcome for the context of the site, having regard to the objectives of the planning scheme and not simply a prescriptive application of the standards. And that's not always an easy balance to reach. And in this case, the officers have formed the view that the minor variances are supportable in the context of that strategic outcome.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I might go to Councillor Watson first because I don't think you've had an opportunity to put your question tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I struggle with the same thing that Councillor Addis was just discussing. If I can use a perhaps more extreme example, because you were talking about the relativity of standards versus the overarching achievement of objectives, and I just don't accept that. Use an example. 5 car parking spaces are required, but we're happy with 4 because we've met the overall overarching objectives. We've got site coverage ratios for a reason, and our
Councillor Watson, have you got a question?
Yeah, I just want you to, if you wouldn't mind going over that again and explaining in more detail why that's okay, because I don't agree with it.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to. Context is extremely important when it comes to planning assessments and planning considerations. Even on the example that was just indicated regarding car parking, locations closer to public transport, more accessible, closer to service and facilities, you may accept a lesser car parking outcome than a location that has less of those accessible and within reach. So context is absolutely critical and important in making a judgment as to whether the objectives have been met. And in this case, what the officers have done is reviewed the setbacks and the heights of the building relative to the adjoining properties to form a view as to whether that objective, the overall objective around the bulk scale, setbacks and heights is acceptable to the adjoining property. In terms of the impacts on the adjoining property, having regard to the specific characteristics on the adjoining property and having regard to the overall objective that says that this is a sort of location where a higher intensity development outcome is expected and should be supported. So it absolutely is critical in forming a view on the objectives. The standards should not always be applied in a prescriptive way on all sites equally.
Follow-up question. So what you're saying is we explain to our residents that we are willing to accept greater than the requirement in terms of site coverage in the name of the overall objective, and just perhaps ignore that so little private open space is required that it has enormous impacts on the overall amenity of the area.
Again, through yourself, Chair, happy to hand over to Mr Farrow and add anything further from a different perspective. But again, it's not a matter of throwing out the objectives or throwing out the expectations in terms of impact on adjoining properties. absolutely that is an important and critical and thorough consideration that the planners need to have. They are not willing to accept a proposal that goes or varies from the standards where that impact is significant, where that impact is detrimental in any way beyond what would normally be considered an acceptable impact. It's minor variations that are the sorts of things that will be accepted and will be looked at in the context of the specific impacts on the adjoining properties and surrounding properties.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Is it true that some of the strategic objectives, more so aspirations, should officers form a view that or particularly say our urban design lead, form a view that the architecture's exemplar, that we have the ability to go beyond the strategic objectives if it's actually contributing further to the amenity? And I'm interested to know whether or not the urban designer actually shares the view that this project is exemplar.
Through you, Chair. So the urban designer hasn't used the specific words that it's exemplar or exemplary architecture, but they were certainly very supportive of the architectural response, the quality materials, the overall height and the way it sat within the context. And just to touch on a few of the points earlier, I think it's important to view the planning scheme holistically to understand the Res Code standards within the strategic context, like Mr. Walker articulated. It's not something that's immediately clear when you review Res Code standards, especially if you're not a planner, but that is a well-established method, it's a well-established test. All councils in Victoria apply the planning scheme in that manner, and it's well tested at VCAT as well.
So to that end, and I couldn't see the word exemplar referenced, and we've certainly got precedent where we have gone beyond the strategic objectives because there are exemplar designs available to us. In the instance that this, it's not a run-of-the-mill project, it's quite attractive, but you know, it's not one that maybe necessarily stands out as a beacon of design for us in that street. Is it merely simple that councillors, maybe there's a councillor that wishes to move a reduction or an increase to the setbacks that will actually help, and will that adversely affect this or have the counter in terms of increase the amenity if there is an increased setback?
Through you, Chair, it would depend on the nature of the setback, the location, and what level of setback we're talking about. But yeah, if it was an increased setback to a side boundary, then presumably it's going to increase the level of amenity to those neighbouring properties. Whether it's required on the individual merit of the application would be a different question.
And that's all subject to whether there's an appetite for the developer to accept that or take it to another authority. But that's something to consider for councillors.
If I might just add to that, Chair, that's absolutely correct. I would always caution against ad hoc increases in setbacks that have a significant flow-on effect to the design of a development. They would need to be done in a considered way if there was to be any change in that regard.
Thank you all. We seem to have exhausted questions. I'm now in search of a motion.
I've just got a question. Are we able to seek a brief adjournment, please?
Are you moving that?
I would like to move that we have a brief adjournment.
Have we a seconder to that?
Yes.
We're all in support? Thank you. We're adjourned. A motion to resume the meeting.
So moved.
Councillor Addis. Yep. Seconded? Seconded. Councillor Thompson. We resume the meeting. I'm returned to the question before. I'm in search of a motion.
Sorry, we do need to take a vote on the resumption.
Oh, sorry. We haven't voted on the resumption. I stand corrected. Can we vote on the resumption of the meeting?
All those in favour?
All in favour? Thank you very much. Unanimous. We will now return to seeking a motion. You ready to go? Councillor Thompson. Okay. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your forbearance with that. I would like to test a refusal, please. So I believe that officers have a recommendation.
Seconder.
Up on the screen.
Is Councillor Addis seconding?
I might ask first if Councillor Bigger is happy with that motion.
Thank you, I am.
Councillor Addis, are you happy to second that motion?
I am. Thanks, Chair.
I will now put the motion. All those in...
We've got debate.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Addis, Councillor Bigger.
I'll see if there's any opposition. Is there any opposition to the motion? Oh, there is. Okay. Councillor Bigger, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I come to this reluctantly, and I suppose I came to this proposal somewhat reluctantly, or somewhat. I see it as line ball, and I do feel somewhat concerned about. Well, I certainly feel concerned about the application, and I appreciate that it is a difficult one for us to consider, because I'm very aware, obviously, of the site of this. The subject site is the right place for a development similar to this. Residents mentioned that. We certainly are very aware that this is the growth zone, and we are looking at densification in a place like this. And what I would say about this proposal is that it's close, but not there. I have concerns about the site coverage. I do think that this issue about, about meeting the objective but not meeting the standard is one that I think some of us struggle with. I certainly struggle with. 5%. I would be concerned if suddenly we had a huge influx of applications suggesting that 5% over the site coverage was actually within the standard itself. It's not. And as Councillor Watson said, we have a standard, and it's a specific number for a reason. So I do struggle with that. I think also we have the overshadowing issue is not insignificant for those residents. And again, for the residents, for instance, in 1A, 1B Fairview, and even though we, I appreciate the attempts that have been made, and I do think there have been some significant attempts made in this application to address the incline and to address the overshadowing, particularly to 1 Fairview Street. We do need to consider, the impacts on all residents, while we're also trying to make way, which we are, for the new residents who will come into these places and who we welcome as we continue to encourage development, so encourage appropriate development. So I think it's a balance. I see this, as I said, as a line ball, but I would encourage a refusal at this point, because I just don't think it quite meets what we need.
Thank you, Councillor Bucher. Councillor Addis, do you want to speak at this point in time or reserve your right?
I think I'll pause. Thank you. Reserve my right.
Comments from any other councillor? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I certainly understand Councillor Bigger's concern with this application, and as we've interrogated the documents tonight and listened to the residents put forward their objections, but likewise also listened to the presenter on behalf of the applicant, and then see the significant volume of conditions that have been applied, the willingness to retain the ornamental pears along the site boundary. I am borderline. I am a little bit unresolved, but I am leaning towards not supporting the refusal because I think this is at a point where potentially it meets the objectives, and whilst it's not an ideal outcome, I feel that it adequately addresses the concerns, and as I said, the conditions applied will certainly improve the application before us. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I certainly hear that this one's very line ball, but from a perspective of, I would say it's probably not line ball enough to refuse it. I think it probably needs support. Whether we like it or we don't, the western end of Riversdale Road is very strategic in terms of the development of Burundara. It is identified as a growth corridor. It's very close to public transport. It's been zoned appropriately for this very type of development. And whether we like it or not, there are rights obviously afforded to those that are able to develop such land parcels. And those rights extend to the fact that it's strategically an objective within our planning scheme for them to do such a thing. Now, the benefit, there are obviously immediate downsides to those who are close to these developments, particularly on a GRZ site like this. But the reality is, if we're to preserve NRZ sites, this is where development occurs. And it's only a matter of time before we start to see more of these developments along that area, that strip. Whilst it hasn't occurred yet, it will happen in due course, as we're seeing along Burwood Road and some of the other growth corridors. I don't particularly like the design outcome here, but we're not making a decision on the design outcome. We're making a decision based around the principles of the planning objectives. So I have to support this one. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I share the views that Councillor Thompson has just made. So I know it's very difficult for residents who are on the boundary of a growth zone and that transition point. Some effort's been made by the proponent. It's not as much as I'd ideally like to see, but they've made some effort. But look, I think Councillor Thompson has made all the points I would have made, so I won't repeat.
Councillor Park.
I agree with what Councillor Thompson said, so I won't repeat those points. I've not heard any compelling reason why this application ought to be refused. It seems, we're borrowing from that much-loved Australian movie, The Castle, and we're proposing to refuse because of the vibe of it. That's not why we're here. The planning law is quite clear, and to refuse this application would be nothing other than a futile exercise and a waste of ratepayers' funds.
Councillor Addis, do you wish to speak at this point in time?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, this certainly is line ball for me too. I came in unsure and I've remained unsure. And I do accept that this is where development must and will occur. But I think it's the way it is so offensive when a developer comes in and they've just cribbed a little bit here and cribbed another little bit there. And it would have been so easy to present something to us that complied. And then I think we would have all agreed that we might not like it, but it complied. But it just feels wrong to ask just for a little bit more when you could get so much without having to be non-compliant. And I can only hope that the applicant will speak with officers, and if it would be great if there was some way that somehow we could allow this to go through, but in a way that was compliant so that we could all feel more easy with it. So I'm still on the refusal end because I don't think there's any other way to send a message that this asking for more is not on from my point of view. Thank you.
Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. I too agree with many of the remarks already said tonight, and I can certainly understand how Councillor Bigger, as the ward councillor, has reached the conclusion she has and put forward a refusal motion this evening. However, if this matter proceeded to VCAT, and I dare say it would, the negotiated outcome and the 105 additional conditions that have been placed upon this application would be eroded, leading to a poorer outcome for the community, I feel. So I think we're always better to try and resolve these in-house through a mediated outcome with the conditions that are applied. So reluctantly, I won't support the refusal motion this evening because I think it will lead to a poorer outcome for the community. The reality is that growth and densification are to be expected in a residential growth zone. It's a bitter pill to swallow and very challenging for those that live in the residential hinterland immediately behind and aside a subject site such as this. But Riversdale Road is going to see more of this, so too the other major roads across Burundara. I certainly agree with Councillor Addis in the remarks made that it is offensive when developers bring such applications to us that push the boundaries of things such as site coverage, as we've seen in this application, and I don't find that at all satisfactory. We have these guidelines for a reason. They are set to benefit the community more broadly, as well as those who then live in these developed sites. So I think it's only fair to try and manage the expectations of the community here. It'll either get approved here tonight or it'll probably go to VCAT and be approved there, resulting in, as Councillor Park said, a financial burden to the ratepayers of Burundara. So unfortunately I won't be supporting this refusal motion.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I will be supporting this refusal motion, and one of the principles that I feel very strongly about is we have standards for a reason. So I do understand that standards versus objectives is part of the art of planning, but in relation to this particular site, I'm also very conscious that this is a transition area and that it has an enormous impact on those who are abutting the site. And to have a large footprint in an area that is already very, very impactful, I think in this instance is wrong. I think the developer can do better. I certainly don't oppose a development on this site of a certain nature, which this has been presented to us tonight. But on the issue of reducing that private open space and the walking away from the standard that has been set out, I can't do that. So I will support the refusal.
Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief because I will support the refusal too. Appreciate the arguments for both considerations of this, but at the end of the day, for me, I'm concerned about several aspects of it, and particularly, albeit that it's strategically compliant with our planning scheme, the whittling away of standards and the gradual encroachment on impacts more and more matters. And I think that sometimes there is an opportunity for us to just put up a firm but gentle resistance. So I will be supporting the deferment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. So for the gallery, what we're about to vote on is a motion to refuse an application tonight. So I now put the motion to the chamber. Sorry, I didn't give you a right of reply. I'm going to be caned to death after this. So be it.
I don't do that. That's all right. You probably heard enough from me. I think I will just summarize in saying that exactly as I think Councillor Watson said, that this is, and Councillor Addis, that this would not have taken much more for this applicant to achieve what we're asking for, and I think that it is important for us. Yes, this is not about saying that we don't want development, or we don't want development at the western end of Riversdale Road where we do, but we obviously always have to have the right kind of development, and I think that makes it that place livable for the new residents as well as those who are there already. And it is a balancing act. I think this particular site where it's the joining of two zones is a particularly important location for us to consider. And so for that reason, and the others that have been mentioned, I would encourage my fellow councillors to support this motion and refuse the application. Thank you.
I think we're now ready to put the motion. Those in favour? 4. Those against? The motion has failed. I guess I'm now in search of another motion. Councillor Thompson, do you want to put another motion? Are you prepared to put another motion?
Unless the ward councillor...
The ward councillor would be happy to hear what your motion is and possibly to suggest that there might be a consideration of a slightly amended version of that. To include the trees.
Okay, my suggestion was the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
We do.
Well, hang on. Do you want to move an amendment to it? Yeah.
Is it opposed?
No.
Procedural,
I think Councillor...
Procedural question about if I wanted to move an amendment, recommend amendment to that? To the officer's recommendation. Does that happen at this point?
I suggest what you could do is suggest what that amendment is and see if the mover will accept that amendment.
Can I ask the officers to put that amendment? There are two amendments. Point N, increase setbacks to comply with, well, you can read that in the red. This is the specific point where which we raised earlier, which related to non-compliance of 2.35 metres.
And I'd be happy to second the amendment if...
And there's one more point, sorry, which is the retention of the pear trees, which I believe is noted below. Sorry, yes, noted in point B.
Right,
P.
that's covered.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Thompson, are you prepared to accept that amendment to your motion?
I think this is maybe prudent that the ward councillor does an amendment to my motion.
You do accept it?
No, he's not accepting it.
So, to assist the chair, I'm not accepting that, but the ward councillor might like to do an amendment, a substantive amendment.
It's my motion now.
Is she prepared to put it as an amendment?
Is it now my motion?
Yes, we'll
Okay.
let you put the amended motion. Do we have a seconder for that amended motion?
It's a small.
No.
Councillor Franco, you had your light on first.
No. An error on having my light on.
Councillor Addis.
I'm happy to second
Second
that as Councillor Biggar's amended motion.
Okay. Is there any opposition to that motion? There is. Councillor Biggar, would you like to speak to your amended motion now?
Apologies. Yes, I have two small changes that I'm proposing in under, as you can see, under P first, the trees. That is, in fact, there has been some confusion, it seems, about whether it was the neighbouring portion of the tree group. According to the resident, all the trees are actually on the site, on the subject site. And PTR did say that they were happy to Mr. Bromley to allow those trees to remain. So that is the first or the second suggested amendment. The other amendment is one particular small area of non-compliance. Well, it's not that small. It's currently is 2.35 meters of non-compliance. It affects one apartment 302, on the and the suggestion is that there be a small change to the balustrade that would affect that would bring that closer to compliance. I apologize that we should have had the officer to explain that more earlier, and that's my fault.
Councillor Addis, would you like to speak to that at this point in time?
Like challenges. So the trees bit, I think, is fairly straightforward, and we've heard that the applicant, I believe, would accept it. The difficulty with the setback that we're seeking to address was that it was quite a big non-compliance, and this seeks to bring it closer to being compliant. Still not compliant, but I believe it does go some way to addressing the things we can address without in any significant way altering this building. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak at this point in time? Councillor Park, you've got your light on.
Chair, I was going to suggest that in the event that Councillor Biggar has no objection, I might move a suspension of standing orders for the purposes of hearing from the officer to explain the effect of the change in paragraph N. I'll so move, and then we'll see what happens, I guess.
Could we have a second?
I'll second that.
All in favour? Suspended. Can we do that?
Through yourself, Chair, we're just going to bring an image up on the screen so that we can provide perhaps some pictorial clarification of the change that's being indicated. What we have is a setback standard under Res Code, which will be shown on a dotted line on the image that we'll bring up on the screen. And what's being suggested by the change is that a balustrading is increased in setback to meet that Res Code standard compliance. It will pull that balustrading back. It will have no other effect or impact on the design of the building. The substantive design of the building and the corner of the building protruding into that Res Code's standard setback will remain, and it doesn't result in a redesign of the building in any way. However, the balustrading would meet the requirement where it currently doesn't. So the overall effect of the area of variation from the standard is reduced by almost 50%. We'll bring those images up just in a moment.
And, Chair, while we're waiting for that image to come, can I just ask you to clarify then that for the rest of the councillors that is just, would only impact on one apartment, is that correct? And the outside, outdoor space of that one apartment, 302, and it would still be within compliant for that apartment, is that correct?
Through yourself, Chair, that's correct. The open space requirements of that apartment would still meet the expectations. The amount of open space and available open space would reduce, but still meet the requirements.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? Could you clarify the open space impacts on the impacted balcony?
The dotted line is the Res Code standard. The dark upright is the balustrading that would be pulled back, and the area at that top level would be reduced in terms of the available open space to that apartment there.
And just to add to that, it would lose about 2 metres of width along that terrace.
Are there any further questions of officers at this point in time, or would you like some time to consider it?
I move that we resume standing orders.
Could I have a seconder on that? I have, Councillor Sinfield. All in support? We resume standing orders. We return to debate. Councillor Bigger and Councillor Addis, you have spoken, so it's open for others to speak at this point in time. Councillor Thompson.
I seek that the motion's put, Chair.
Do we have a seconder for that procedural motion? We do. Councillor Addis. We put it at this point in time. All in favour of that motion? Fantastic. We now put the motion which is the amendments as proposed by Councillor Bigger to the officer's recommendation. All in support of the amended motion as it stands? That's 9. And are those against? 1. It's carried. Thank you. You'll be relieved to know we're now moving to item 3.2. Cross Street, Canterbury, construction of a single dwelling in a heritage overlay. I now call Nicole Shah to present this matter. Shah.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I present item 3.2 for application PP 22-0465 for the construction of a new dwelling and fence in a heritage overlay at 10 Cross Street in Canterbury. The subject site is within the neighbourhood residential zone and is located within Heritage Overlay HO 145. With respect to the history of the site, subdivision permit PP 20/0351 was issued on the 1st of December 2020 and approved the demolition of the existing building and subdivided the land into 3 lots with building envelopes. Each building envelope controls the location and siting of any newly developed dwellings on each lot. One of the created lots is now known as 10 Cross Street in Canterbury. The proposal seeks to construct a new double-storey dwelling. The dwelling will be sited within the approved building envelope. It will be contemporary in form whilst utilising design elements and materiality from the wider heritage streetscape. The dwelling has a recessed first floor, set back 14 metres from the front tidal boundary, and this helps to sensitively integrate the dwelling into the existing residential neighbourhood. The proposed development displays a high level of compliance with the Boroondara planning scheme, including the local heritage policy. All concerns from the Heritage Advisor have been addressed and is supported in full. A total of 19 objections have been received. The objections received predominantly relate to the design response with respect to the heritage overlay, the scale, height and massing of the dwelling, as well as landscaping opportunities. The proposal is consistent with the relevant planning controls and policy and delivers a well-articulated and sympathetic design response within a heritage overlay area. It is recommended that Council issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit subject to the conditions detailed in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. We have one presenter tonight in favour of the proposal. Mr. Marshall, would you like to come up to the horseshoe table? Could you start with your name and the suburb in which you live?
Good evening. My name is Christopher Marulli. Apologies for my handwriting if it was a bit confusing there. I'm with Ratio Consultants on behalf of the permit applicant.
Thank you.
We're residing in Cremorne. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Our client seeks approval for the construction of a 2-storey dwelling within the heritage overlay, which we highlight is the only permit trigger pertaining to this application. First, we'd like to thank the opportunity for the Planning Department for their engagement throughout the application and appreciate their recommendation for a permit to be issued. I'd also like to thank the objectors and Council's Heritage Advisor for their input on the project. It is acknowledged that the application has extensive history, as you can see from the Council report prepared for this matter. Our client has gone to significant lengths to address both Council and the objector parties' concerns with this application, and 2 separate applications abutting to the east, 12 Cross Street and 25 Bryson Street, over the last 18 months. For context, the application was originally lodged on the 22nd of June 2022, and while we acknowledge that the design was not up to an appropriate standard with our initial application, this has resulted in 2 separate amendments being lodged thereafter, working diligently to meet the concerns, including within a consultation meeting with the community and Councillor Addis a couple of months ago. These key changes include a complete redesign to the architectural form fronting Cross Street. This includes a well-recessed first floor envelope which sits behind prominent ground floor roof gables, a reduction in maximum building height from 8.9 metres to 8.35 metres approximately. Importantly, this also incorporates significant height and setback reductions at first floor from the southern or cross street elevation. The basement sublevel and ramp from Cross Street have been deleted. Vehicle accommodation is now proposed in a timber look vertical batting garage, subject to council condition. This is to blend the vehicle accommodation into the facade fronting Cross Street. Importantly, the garage has also been reduced from double to single width from the streetscape presentation. And also, we just like to highlight that there's an increased first floor setback from 2.5 metres to 5 metres from the western boundary. So we'd just like to say that considering the scale of the application and the lengths we've gone to facilitate a positive outcome, we respectfully request that you support this quality application and the Planning Department's recommendation of approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well within the time limits. Councillors, are there any questions of the presenter tonight? None. You can return to the gallery. Thanks very much. To the officers, do you have anything to comment on in relation to that presentation? None. Thank you. Gosh, this might be a simpler one at this point in time. I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Addis.
It is simpler, I hope. I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Thompson?
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any opposition to this motion? None. Thank you. Councillor Addis, do you want to speak to your motion?
Just a couple of things. I think it's important to emphasise that we really have come a very long way over, in fact, quite a number of years in the application to develop this site. And I think the officers are owed a big thank you for the diligent way they've worked with the applicant and indeed with the community who did have concerns, but they probably have largely been addressed, as evidenced by the fact that they're not actually here tonight. And this is a community that is well able to object should they feel the need to do so. So the other thank you is to the applicant. And look, while I don't absolutely love this application, and I think the neighbourhood might say similar things, we can be very grateful that they have worked so hard to comply and make this as good as they felt able to for the community. And I think that's really to be commended and not something we always see, that, you know, they'll hang in there and work with officers and the community and try to seek an outcome that everyone can be happy with, in recognition that I understand the applicant does intend to become a member of this community, and I think it's a very good outcome that the community can welcome a new person into the neighbourhood who they feel has listened to their concerns and responded. So it is in a sense with pleasure that I move the officer's recommendation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Addis. Councillor Thompson, this is unopposed. Do you feel the need to speak tonight? Thank you. I will now move the motion. Those in support? Nobody against. It's unanimous. The motion is carried. Thank you. We shall now move on to item 3.3 on the agenda, 36 Coolancoot Road, Hawthorn, outcome of Ministerial Advisory Committee, Amendment C28.4, Part 2, BROR. Michaela Carter will speak to that tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform the Urban Planning Delegated Committee of the recommendations of the Ministerial Advisory Committee appointed to consider Amendment C284 Part 2 BORO. Amendment C284 Part 2 seeks to apply a permanent heritage overlay to the property at 36 Kooyongkoot Road, Hawthorn. The property was originally part of the Hawthorn Heritage Gap Study. On the 14th of July 2020, a Section 39 appeal was made by the property owner to the Victorian Civil and Administrative Tribunal, VCAT, claiming a defect in procedure by Planning Panels Victoria. On the 3rd of August 2020, the UPDC resolved to defer consideration of the amendment C284 Part 2 until these VCAT proceedings and any required actions were concluded. On the 6th of November this year, the Ministerial Advisory Committee recommended the property not be included in the heritage overlay, finding the thresholds for local significance for criterion D, E and H have not been met. The committee agreed with the 3 heritage experts appearing for the owners and found the significant alterations, particularly to the facade of the dwelling, mean that the dwelling is no longer intact. Officers therefore recommend the UPDC resolve to receive and acknowledge the Ministerial Advisory Committee report and to refer Amendment C284 Part 2 to an ordinary meeting of Council to be abandoned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Carter. We do have one presenter on this matter tonight. In favour of it, Mr Nick Sutton, can you please join us at the horseshoe table? Thank you. As for those before you, can you please have your name and the suburb in which you live? Thank you.
Certainly. Good evening. Nick Sutton of Norton Rose, Fulbright, representing the landowner.
Thank you.
Really, this will be quite short. We're here to support, of course, the professional council officer's recommendation to the committee. This is a matter that's gone through a very meticulous independent ministerial advisory committee process. That advisory committee has heard from 4 independent expert witnesses, and of course that report is before you tonight, appended to the agenda. We say that that's a persuasive, compelling recommendation to you as to the future of this site, and we should say it doesn't really surprise us that that was the conclusion of the advisory committee. The last time this matter was before this committee to consider the actual merits of this property as opposed to procedural matters, that was, I think, on the 17th of June 2019, and in that instance this committee resolved that the property should not be within the heritage overlay on the basis of Council's heritage advisor at the time. So we say the recommendation of the advisory committee is entirely consistent with the resolution that this committee has had once upon a time, and we're in your hands as to if there's any questions.
Thank you for your very brief presentation tonight. Councillors, are there any questions of Mr Sutton? None. Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery. This is not opposed tonight, so sorry.
I have a question of officers, if that's okay.
Sorry. Yes, Councillor Franco, please.
Unless the officers are going to respond to anything.
Well, I was giving them that opportunity.
There are no matters arising through you, Chair. Thank you.
I'd just like to understand why it proceeded to the panel, given that this committee in 2019 resolved to not proceed.
Through you, Chair, the committee resolved to remove the property from the heritage overlay prior to the submissions being referred to an independent planning panel. We did have 2 submissions from other submitters that supported the property going in the heritage overlay. So the matter was then referred to the planning panel for consideration. Following the release of the panel report, that Section 39 defects appeal was made, and we came back to the chamber and resolved to split the amendment while the legal proceedings carried out. Does that answer your question?
I'm still a little bit unclear. I don't understand, because I would assume this committee has the highest authority in terms of making a decision.
Through yourself, Chair, in simple terms, this matter got a life of its own outside of the control of this committee. If I want to actually bring it down to the simplest terms, it had a number of different procedures and steps involving different parties that got beyond this particular committee.
It's just extraordinary to me to understand how it could have gone on for so many years at cost to ratepayers, to owners, to everybody involved, that's all. And maybe it requires an explanation separately, but I find it hard to comprehend.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Park.
Chair, speaking of things that are hard to comprehend, you just announced that this is unopposed. I'm wondering how you could possibly know that.
Sorry, I meant that the Speaker was in favour of the officer's recommendation. That's why I gave them the option to speak or not speak at this point in time, but thank you for correcting me, Councillor Park.
No, I didn't correct you, Chair. I just sought clarification.
I'm now in search of a motion. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation, put forward that.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Thompson.
Yep, thank you.
Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No? Good. I will now put that motion. Those in favour? Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Bigger?
Only exceptionally briefly, much more briefly than last time, to say this, as officers have noted, this has gone on for some time. It did start well before my time in this chamber, but at this point, regardless of what has gone before, I think that the reality is that this Ministerial Advisory Committee gives us I think this is the end of the road for this matter, and it's appropriate for us to put this to our next meeting of council, and that is what the proposal is tonight, that we refer this amendment to our ordinary meeting of council, which I believe will be quite soon. That's all.
Again, Councillor Thompson, I give you the opportunity to speak if you so choose.
I dare not, but this is very procedural, Chair, so happy for it to be put.
Thank you. I now put the motion. Those in favour? All in. It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Well, that finishes item 3. You're all relieved to find out, I'm sure. General business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business which you wish to raise this evening? No? Any items of urgent business you wish to raise this evening? No, thank you. Confidential business? None, thank you. Before I close this meeting, I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you all.